Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Today we have the pleasure to receive Professor Tom Loredo from Cornell and Ashish Mahabal from Caltech. And so this is the third webinar in our LSST series, and they're going to talk about astrostatistics. So thank you very much for accepting this invitation, and please go ahead.
Great. Thanks, Vinicius. Firstly, thank you for giving Ashish and I both promotions to professor. But I think we're both on senior researchers at our respective universities at Cornell and Caltech. And what we're going to talk to you about today is one of the LSST science collaborations, the Informatics and Statistics Science Collaboration, or ISSC. And specifically, we're going to talk about some activity happening this year that's being organized in part by the ISSC at a place in the U.S., a research institute called SAMSI. So in the talk, I'll tell you about the ISSC, I'll tell you about SAMSI, and then I'll tell you a little bit of some of the science going on at SAMSI, and then mostly centered around time series and modeling cosmic population. And then Ashish will pick it up and tell you about some of the SAMSI work that's going on that's a little more directly associated with synoptic surveys. Okay, I have more slides than I thought. I had to throw this together rather quickly. The timing of this meeting is pretty poor for both Ashish and I with other deadlines. So forgive me if I go a little fast. I'm just trying to get through a lot of material. None of it's very complicated until near the end, and there I'm only going to very quickly give overviews. So hopefully the pace won't be too bad. So the ISSC is one of the LSST science collaborations. It's actually the latest one. I believe it's the only one formed independently of the actual creation of the LSST corporation. I spearheaded the proposal that formed it about 6 or 7 years ago, and we're still kind of finding our way in terms of figuring out what exactly our role is and how we can help other people and also get support for ourselves for the work we're doing. There was recently a change in leadership about 1.5 years ago. Chad Schaefer and I took over as co-chairs, and the group has a core leadership team, and these are the names. I'll say a little bit about that in a minute, but this is just to give you a link to the web page. So the purpose is to help coordinate interactions between the various science collaborations and the broader LSST user community that involve or will require data analysis, methodology, research. So we're not so interested in the kinds of analysis methods that astronomers are already very familiar with, you know, chi-squared fitting and maximum likelihood. We're trying to coordinate research and educational efforts about more advanced things. There are 3 main objectives. We're trying to find areas where different applications relevant to LSST might share common methodology, or where there's a methodological need within LSST that's related to work in other disciplines that maybe we can learn from. We're trying to bring existing methods to bear on the overlapping areas by consulting with statisticians and other scientists, and just by educating ourselves and other LSST scientists. And then we're also trying to build interdisciplinary research teams to actually do new research on new methods. So key features of this particular science collaboration: it's interdisciplinary, so 60% roughly of the membership, and there's 40 or so members currently. 60% are astronomers, about 40% are statisticians, computer scientists, machine learning experts, and people like that. The people in this science collaboration kind of have a dual role. Most of us are doing research, especially the astronomers. We're doing LSST related research ourselves in some science area, like I'm working on variable stars and exoplanets and photo Z and things like that. But we're also trying to serve as consultants for other people doing other research. We try to focus on areas where the research alliances will cut across application areas in LSST, like are there particular methods that are interesting both to the variable stars people and to the transient people, or both to the people doing extragalactic astronomy and the people doing cosmology, like photo Z. And there's a core team of 7 members, about roughly half astronomers and half statisticians, that's trying to coordinate the efforts. And then the broader membership consists of regular members, which are mostly people actually working on LSST science and mostly astronomers, and then affiliates. And exactly how to divide the membership is something that's evolving. It's been made more complicated by the invitation of international collaborators, and so we're trying to figure out how this should work. This is a topic that's come up in other science collaborations too. So we're interested in any feedback on how this will work. We don't want the official membership of the ISSC to consist of everyone who uses advanced data analysis methods. That would be almost everybody in any of the science collaborations. We want people who are involved in actively doing new research, probably interdisciplinary with other people in other fields. The activities of the group, I'll work through some of the planned activities, but this slide is just to point you to a page at the LSST website that describes some of our activities. It's pretty sparse now. There are only 5 or 6 things listed there, but it includes kind of activities of the entire collaboration as a whole, like the SAMSI program that I'll tell you about, which involves not the whole collaboration but many members. And then also, we want this part of our page to describe the research projects of individual members, and there are just 2 examples on there now from the co-chairs, myself and Chad, but we hope to populate this soon with more examples. So here are the main current, and some of these are just planned at the moment, activities in 4 different groups. First, as I mentioned, all of us are doing research related to LSST, and usually involving some kind of new methodology or adaptation of methodology from other areas. We are just starting to write tutorials. So I should say the next 3 bullets have come from discussion with LSST people outside of the ISSC, in particular with Željko Iveček, who's the project scientist, and the kinds of things that they wanted to see from us. And so they would really like tutorials on specific pieces of methodology that might not be known to astronomers, or they've also asked for advice in areas where astronomers might not be using methods correctly, like p-values or significance levels. So we're planning on writing some tutorials. Eric Feigelson is coordinating that effort, and it's not going to be limited only to LSST topics. It's going to be done in coordination with various astrostatistics groups from the IAU, the AAS here in North America, the American Statistical Association, which has a working group on astrostatistics, and the International Astrostatistics Association, which I think some of you might know about, which is obviously an international effort about astrostatistics. We're trying to identify curators who will kind of serve as a contact point for people to learn about methods that exist or to promulgate their new methods, so that we can avoid duplication of effort across LSST scientists. The initial 2 areas that we're thinking of doing this for are event classification. Ashish will probably be the point person for that. We haven't really sorted all that out yet. And photometric redshifts, where 3 of the core team members are heavily involved in that. Sam Schmidt, who's part of the dark energy collaboration, Tomasz Budivari and myself are involved in that. So probably Sam will try to draft Sam to be the curator for that. And then finally, we're going to try to build some data challenges, and I think Ashish might say more about that. The first one we've talked about is a transient classification data challenge. So that's the ISSC. Now let me tell you about SAMSI. So what is SAMSI? It's an acronym. First of all, it stands for the Statistical and Applied Mathematical Sciences Institute. It's not just an acronym, it's a building. So this is the building. It's in Research Technology Park in North Carolina. That's in eastern North Carolina, and it's right in the middle between Duke University, which is a hotbed of statistics research, UNC, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, which has a great astronomy department and good statisticians, and then North Carolina State University, which has a very excellent statistics department. So that's where it is. So a little more about it. It's funded by the National Science Foundation. I mentioned it's in North Carolina. The most important thing here are these last two bullets. So its mission basically is to try to find areas in science or engineering that could benefit from more interaction with applied mathematicians and statisticians, and then to try to put together a program to make that happen. And the way it does this at the bottom, the mechanism, is that it will sponsor and host 2 or 3 programs per year that are 9-month-long interdisciplinary research programs. And as well, it typically hosts 2 or 3 shorter summer programs. And so what does a program consist of? Well, let me tell you about the SAMSI ASTRO program. This is actually the second program in astrostatistics that SAMSI has hosted. The first one was in 2006, and Ashish and I were both part of that. And that was a 3-month program, and this is now a 9-month program. The leader and the instigator of it is Jogesh Babu. He's a statistician who specializes in astrostatistics. He's the head of the Center for Astrostatistics, or CAST, at Penn State University. And then at SAMSI itself, the deputy director, Sujit Ghosh, is the liaison for our program. So he handles the official business stuff, but he's also quite an outstanding statistician, and he's already contributed some really good ideas to the research that's going on. And then there are 16 plus other co-organizers, including myself and Ashish, who planned the program starting over a year ago. The program just started in August, so it's been a long time in planning, and is finally in execution. Here are the elements of the program. It starts with a big meeting in August that was basically to set the agenda, the detailed agenda. Of course, we had kind of big picture plans already in place, but we wanted it to be the actual detailed agenda to be set by the actual participants. So something close to 70 to 80 people attended this opening workshop. Not everyone was planning on full participation in the program, but they at least helped set the agenda. The heart of the program is working groups, and I'll say more about them in a minute. The program, SAMSI, is also sponsoring what they call mid-program workshops, so anywhere from 1 to 3 week gatherings of people at the SAMSI building or at some other location, where SAMSI helps provide travel support for people to get there and logistics support at the location. And that's focusing on specific areas in the program, and I'll tell you about one of those. So there are 3 of those currently on the books. There's one on exoplanet populations, which just happened in October. There's one Ashish is planning on transients related to synoptic surveys that you'll hear more about, and then there's one happening in the spring on uncertainty quantification for populations that are simulated with the expensive simulators, and I'll say a bit more about that later. And there might be another one popping up, so this is a very flexible thing. And then the program will end in next May with a transition workshop that will be held at SAMSI. As part of the program, one of the semesters, it turns out to be this semester, SAMSI brings in a visitor lecturer. In this case, it's James Long, a statistician from Texas A&M University, and he offers a new astrostatistics course for the 3 universities. SAMSI has provided funds, half of the funds to hire 3 postdocs, the other half coming from the statistics departments in the area universities. So they're all 3 postdocs are statistician PhDs, and they're all working very heavily on astrostatistics research in the program. And then it's funding people to actually spend extended visits at SAMSI to work together. Jogesh Babu is spending the whole semester there. This semester, Eric Feigelson will be there all of the spring semester. James Long is there all of this semester. And then several of us are going to be there for anywhere from a week or 2 to a month in the spring. I will be there in the spring for about a month. One of the main things I'll be doing is working with Feigelson on some of these tutorials that I mentioned. So that's when that work of the ISSC, that's when we expect it to start picking up. The working groups, so there are 5 of them. I'll just tell you briefly what the 5 are about, and then I'll tell you more about numbers 2 and 3, and then or 3 and 4 rather, and then Ashish will tell you about working group 2. So working group 1 is about how do you do uncertainty quantification, statistical inference when the model that you want to do inference for is very expensive to handle computationally, like requiring the run of an n-body code or a population synthesis code. So there's a lot of technology for that in the statistics world, especially in Bayesian statistics, called emulation. That's a technical term of art, and so there's a working group on that. There's a working group on Synoptic Time Domain Surveys, and the people I've listed here are the 2 main working group leaders. There's one who's an astronomer, that's listed first, and the second one is a statistician. So everything is built to be a close partnership between the 2 disciplines. So working group 2 is Ashish and Jogesh. Working group 3 is on multivariate and irregularly sampled time series, obviously potentially relevant to LSST. Ben Farr is a LIGO astronomer, and Suman Lahiri is a statistician who does a lot of stochastic process modeling. Astrophysical Populations, working group 4. It's very much dominated by exoplanet people, but some of us who do other things, like me, are involved in it too. Eric Ford is the astronomer, and Jesse Chizuski, a statistician at Yale. And then working group 5 is about cosmology. This is the working group that was kind of organized the latest, and I'm not exactly sure what's going on in that working group. So even though it's obviously closely related to LSST, and Elizabeth is part of the dark energy science collaboration, it's kind of the working group that since it's been around the least has had the least interaction with the others. So unfortunately I can't tell you much about what's going on there, but maybe you can recruit Elizabeth to tell you. How do the working groups operate? I'm just checking the time. So they have, it's mostly done remotely. So we have weekly telecons, mostly by WebEx, where someone just volunteers to talk about the work that they've been doing as part of the program. Most of the working groups have subgroups that might have anywhere from 3 to 5 people working on a specific task, and then every few weeks they'll report back to the main working group. And we try to exchange ideas between the subgroups, and then even we try to have people in multiple working groups, like me in working groups 2 and 3, that try to communicate across the working groups. The working groups organize these midterm workshops I mentioned. And then finally, of particular relevance to you folks, the working groups have a fluid and ongoing membership. So if you see some topic come up that's of interest to you, and if you're willing to actually do some work with other people relevant to that topic, then please talk to Ashish and I, or whoever the leader of the group is, and you'd be welcome to join in in particular, after the new year, some of the working groups are going to more or less reset and kind of change their direction. This is, I know, definitely happening in working group 3, where it's going to pick up a lot more activity after the new year. So that might be a good time to try to join a working group. So working group 3, I'm going to tell you about 3 and 4 a little more. Working group 3 is about multivariate and irregularly sampled time series. It's the main science drivers are LIGO, how it can use more than just the strain time series. Are there ways it can exploit all the housekeeping time series to help beat down noise and outliers and things. Pulsar timing arrays for looking at gravitational waves in a rather different frequency regime. They're very interested in handling outliers in time series and how to do fast computation with kind of complex time series models, mostly Bayesian. And then for both AGN, active galactic nuclei, and exoplanets, there's a lot of interest in stochastic process modeling of time series. Modeling AGN light curves, which we know are temporally correlated, and then modeling exoplanet host star light curves, which are contaminated by correlated stellar activity. Statistical themes involve trying to go beyond the Gaussian processes that are currently used for a lot of these things. And an area of statistics that's called functional data analysis, which is how do you do population statistics, demographic statistics, but when you're talking about populations of functions like light curves or spectra, as opposed to populations of a scalar like a luminosity function or a redshift distribution. That's something that's a main focus of my own research. So. Working group 4, Astrophysical Populations. So the science drivers there are LIGO, trying to infer the occurrence rates of events and the distributions of the properties of coalescing binary systems. Exoplanets, also occurrence rates, distributions of properties of planets, and then also studying variability across stellar populations to see if that can help us disentangle exoplanet signals from stellar activity. And then also stellar spectroscopy, dynamic spectroscopy, where you measure spectra, high-resolution spectra at different times. There's a lot of interest. It turns out a lot of relevant methodology tying these last two bullets together. Young stars have the constant stellar atmosphere spectrum, but they also have accretion that's dynamic and producing a time-dependent component. They want to study that separately. And then spectroscopic binaries, there's a lot of interest in stellar spectroscopy and trying to find very weak binary companions, and that involves very detailed analysis of the time changes in the spectrum. Trying not to just find, like one line that you see with high significance moving, but rather trying to find, many very weak features, each of them individually perhaps not confidently detectable, but once you pool together across the spectrum, providing enough evidence for you to do orbit estimation. The statistical themes there, the main one is almost everybody's using hierarchical Bayesian methods and drawing graphical models. An emerging idea is doing non-parametric modeling of distributions and of complicated functions like spectra. A lot of work on spectral decompositions like PCA. I'll talk a little bit more about these just in the pictures. So now I'm just going to run quickly through just some pictures. I'm not going to say much in detail. It's just to convey to you the kinds of things that are being discussed in the working groups. So this is in the populations working group. So we're doing cosmic demographics, learning about populations of binary black holes and of exoplanets. So LIGO, as you probably all know, has detected 3 events, two high significance and one maybe not so high. And a question for them is, well, this is what we have, 3 events. What can you say about populations with just 3 events? It means you have to do the statistics carefully if you don't want to fool yourselves. So they have graphical models. These are hierarchical Bayesian models where there's some parameters, parametric models describing the distribution of black hole binary properties. if you know those parameters and there's some distribution for the masses of the black holes that might be coalescing, then if you know the masses, then you could hope to predict the data if you also know the spectra, the noise spectrum. And so it's a rather simple graphical model, but some of the ingredients, especially the noise modeling, is very complicated. But this just gives you a picture of what they're trying to do. So they'll assume that there's a uniform distribution for one of the masses, and then the other one is a power law distribution, and they're trying to estimate the power law index for what's the distribution of companion masses of black holes. And this just shows you their current inference. Just trying to convey to you not the details of their results, but just what is going on at the big picture level. So they already do this. If you've seen their papers, you've seen this kind of work. And so what they're trying to do now is try to do this more flexibly, imagining in a few years that we'll have dozens or maybe hundreds eventually of these systems. What do you do then? So this is an example of work that's being explored right now, where they draw a 2D histogram and they regularize it with something like a Gaussian process. And this is based on simulations where there's like a population of black hole binaries and a population of neutron star binaries, and just showing that you might hope to be able to separate those out. For exoplanets, for example, the kinds of distributions they're looking at are mass versus radius of exoplanets, and they're interested in what this tells you about the composition of exoplanets and their equation of state. The challenge here is that there's measurement error in both axes, and you're trying to learn some kind of underlying distribution. And right now that's being done parametrically using hierarchical Bayesian modeling again. And this shows you they're basically trying to fit power law distributions for mass versus radius, or some of the people in this area prefer to do it as radius versus mass. So and then they make some, they make some distributional assumptions, like that things are Gaussian about this curve, and then they try to learn the parameters of the curve and of the density about the curve from the data. For example, they try to find the power law index gamma, how that depends on the constant that determines where this line is. So that's work that's been recently published. There's still details about it that people are working on, and that's happening as part of SAMSI. But there are, and this is the graph underlying that, there are parameters that determine population distributions for the radius and for the mass once you know the radius, and then there are noisy observations. So, the new directions that are being explored at SAMSI, well, one is how do you account for selection effects? Those have so far been ignored in a lot of this modeling. I've handled them in other areas, and some of the lessons that I learned the hard way by making mistakes have been relearned. So the LIGO people have relearned some of this lessons. In particular, it's actually somewhat subtle how to correctly handle selection effects when you also have significant measurement error. That's something that's been worked out. I've worked it out in the distant past for other problems, but LIGO has just kind of rediscovered how to do this correctly, and the exoplanet people are just learning. So that's one of the directions of research. Another is how to break these strong assumptions, like the power law fit of mass versus radius and assuming that things are Gaussian. So Sujit Ghosh and his graduate student Bo are teaming up with some of the exoplanet people, especially Angie Wolfgang, and they've come up with a non-parametric way to do this. It uses Bernstein polynomials, which I've used myself long ago for estimating background rates for Poisson problems, but they have more magical properties than I appreciated, and so we've been learning about those. That's kind of cool work. So instead of assuming this is a power law and that conditionally on knowing one of the variables, the other one is Gaussian, they just infer a very general joint distribution, and from it you can learn the conditional density or the marginal densities. So there's actually a mistake in this that was sorted out at the workshops. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. All right. All right. Okay. I'm starting to hear an echo, so if somebody just turned on their sound, You want to turn it on. So, down. I'm going to have to. I'm getting a strong echo, so I'm going to turn down my sound. So speak loudly if you have a question. So this is population inference for LIGO. This is showing that, or this is for exoplanets, just showing that one might try to simulate the populations, and that's expensive to do. Something similar is going on with LIGO. How do you do inference with these expensive simulations? So one of the things that's been being worked on is using ABC, or approximate Bayesian computation, which is how to do inference where you try to avoid actually evaluating the likelihood function. And then one of the main new directions is how to do this, how to do these things together by combining ABC with coming up with fast kind of surrogate emulators of these expensive simulators by doing kind of fancy non-parametric Bayesian interpolation and extrapolation, but in a way that doesn't just fit a function but also gets uncertainties and propagates them fully through the analysis. So that's going to be the topic of a workshop in April, though of course there's work going on through the year on that. Another main topic, and this was one of the focuses of the October exoplanet workshop, is how do you try to model ensembles of high-resolution spectra. So for exoplanets, you're looking at stellar spectra with lots of lines. The lines are shifting back and forth due to the Doppler shift of being tugged on by the planet. That's what you'd like to measure. But the lines are also changing their depth and shape in subtle ways due to stellar activity, and you want to separate that out. And so the idea is, how can you, look at ensembles of spectra from simulations to learn how to separate out those two effects. Also, how could you learn further details by looking at ensembles of observed spectra to do that? A very similar problem comes up with high-res spectroscopy of young stars. I mentioned trying to separate out the time-dependent accretion component from the end stages of stellar formation from the constant stellar atmosphere component. So what's shown here are high-resolution spectra in different colors taken at different epochs. And some of the variability is noise, but some of it is actual real temporal variability. So how do you pull that out? So Ian Jacala at Stanford has been doing that. So what's one of the interesting things that's happening at SAMSI is these two teams are actually working together, exoplanets and the young stellar people, to try to see if there are ideas that can go back and forth between them. The underlying ideas are actually rather complicated graphical models, so these are the ones we've come up with at the workshop. They involve a lot of nested plates. They're actually pretty sophisticated. We actually even had to learn some notational tricks that hadn't been in astronomy before. And then here are some of the methodological ideas, pooling together multivariate Gaussian processes separately in wavelength and in time and getting them to interact, building stochastic processes with empirical basis functions from kind of various takes, modifications of principal component analysis, doing dimension reduction with diffusion maps. So these things are not directly relevant to LSST, but for me, as somebody interested in Photo Z, I'm following it very carefully because I think there are ideas there that are relevant to modeling galaxy sets underlying Photo Z. And I think that was the end of my my summary. Okay, so that's kind of what's been going on at SAMSI for working groups 3 and 4. And with that, I'll pass it on to Ashish for the Synoptic Survey working group.
Okay, thank you, Tom. And I guess I need to be made the presenter. Okay, so let's see. Let me know when you start seeing my screen.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, great. So thank you, Tom, for a great introduction to the informatics group and statistics group at LSST, as well as the SAMSI Astro program in general. I'm going to talk about the WG2, the working group 2, and it's about the Synoptic Time Domain Surveys. So let me see. Stop. Okay, I need to click to advance. So can I go back? Okay, good. Yeah. So this roughly the outline. So Tom already told you about things. I also wanted to mention that I'm the co-chair of the LSST Transients and Variable Stars group. A couple of weeks ago or a few weeks back, you already heard a talk from Federica Bianco about that group. But there are a large number of overlaps between that group and this group. So the WG2 has many subgroups working on that, and I'll go through most of them very briefly, but to summarize again, there are about 25 members actively working in this. We had the opening workshop, and as Tom mentioned, we are going to have an intermediate workshop, and that's actually happening in India in March, again focused on this working group, but there will also be some components of LIGO and gravitational waves there, because there are, as Tom again pointed out, many overlaps between these use cases and scenarios as well. And the one point that I wanted to mention is that there is a huge amount of interconnectivity between the subgroups also. So when I talk of one particular subgroup, there will always be connections with the others. In the brief time that I have today, I may not be able to bring those out right away, but we can always discuss them later, and especially if people are interested in becoming part of this, and in general the LSST collaborations, you are more than welcome. You should get in touch with us later on. So one of the things that I wanted to mention was the intricacies of a data challenge. That is one thing that we want to bring out together. And so a few years back, there was the supernova data challenge, Kessler et al. There was one paper describing the challenge, and later on another paper after many groups had provided their inputs and they were ranked and how they did and so on. So it was interesting there. The data challenge itself consisted of two parts: use the full light curves and classify between 1A and non-1A, or try to use just the first 6 points of the light curve and see what you can do. Because when LSST comes on, what you would want to do is that try to do the classification as soon as possible, because there are going to be a large number of competing transients, and you don't want to wait for too long for rare transients, and you don't want to be bogged down by typical transients that you already understand. But very interestingly, not a single group attempted that second part of the challenge using only the first 6 points to do anything about that. I hope that will change when we present our challenge. It's still in the works, a lot of work needs to be done and so on, but I'll provide a little bit of what's happening in our subgroup within now. And very likely what will happen is that we may end up using Kaggle, the widely popular platform, so that we don't have to do a lot of work in the background, the back end of the challenge itself. The grade 3 challenge did that because they had some funding from elsewhere. 2 of their people were working for several months on setting up the challenge. I don't think that's going to happen in this particular case. So as a reminder, there are going to be 1 to 10 million transients per night, and majority of them will be fairly understood one. On the right hand side, you see the current broker, which is, or rather the current design of the broker. The broker doesn't exist yet. NOAO is planning this entire